With over 25,000 children's books published every year, it's hard to know what to pick to read to your children. I'm here today to share with you some tips about how to choose what to read to your child, and to provide some resources that will help you find the books that will get them hooked, or the texts that will get them really hooked on reading and will also help them with their language and literacy development. I am Dr. Jen Schlaber with Lasting Literacy Solutions. I use my 20 plus years in education to help families and educators know more about literacy learning, because when we know more, we can do better. So the first thing I'd like to share with you is a little understanding of how to choose books through various ages. Again, we're talking about books to read aloud to your children. So in our very, very youngest ages, we really want to focus on books that have bright colored, simple pictures, that have a simple text with repetition, rhythms and rhymes, and possibly even just labeling of pictures, that cover early concepts like colors and shapes, and books that are interactive, that they can touch and manipulate and are very durable. They can also chew them. In the years beyond toddlerhood into the preschool years, 3 to 5 years old, again, still bright, big illustrations, rhyming and repetition, simple stories and plots that they can kind of relate to, and answers to their very many questions about why things are the way they are, so that they can learn about the world around them. In the beginning elementary years, between 6 and 8 years old, somewhere between kindergarten and second grade, the kinds of books that really hook these kids are books that explore interests that they already have and that help them create new interests, books that have relatable characters and situations, books with themes that connect and stretch them, so themes that connect them to other kids like them or kids that are different than them, and stretch them in ways to get them to think about putting themselves in other people's shoes. And then introductory chapter books as well. I kind of bounce between saying books and texts because I'll talk about other kinds of things that we can get our kids reading to get them hooked and to read to them. So in the older years, between probably about third grade and up through sixth grade, we can still read aloud and should read aloud to our kids books about increasingly complex or tough topics. And by reading these to our children, we get the opportunity to have really great discussions with them about things that can be very hard for them to bring up, or things that are hard for us to bring up too. Also in these years, books that have relatable characters and situations that they can kind of learn how to navigate some of the things that are going on in their lives. And then, of course, books that build knowledge of the complex world around them, and also build their curiosity about the world around them. When we think about choosing books for kids, especially like first grade and up, we want to think about mixing it up a little bit, making sure that kids have the opportunity to be exposed to books of various genres, both types of fiction and types of nonfiction, and then other genres, is really important. I'm going to link this handout below this video, so you can, because sometimes keeping track of all the genres that are out there can be a little tricky. So the greater variety that we expose our kids to, the more likely that they'll develop more and different interests, also a stronger vocabulary, and the various genres have different kinds of language and language structures, which are important for our children, and understanding of how text works. So every genre kind of works a little bit differently, especially when you look at differences between fiction and nonfiction. And then also the various genres really help kids increase their knowledge of themselves, the social world, the physical world, time and history. So mixing it up is super important for them. And all of these different things really help to build their comprehension skills as well, along with just getting to know who they are as little readers. Also, you want to mix it up some more. So not just thinking about books, but thinking about lots of different kinds of texts. So comics, and reading comics to children helps them to be able to read comics on their own eventually. And yes, they can learn from comics. They can be kind of a gateway into lots of other reading. Cookbooks, newspapers. This is a section of the Washington Post. I think it's every Sunday. It's specifically written for kids between 2nd grade and I believe it's 6th grade. Having kids read their own writing their own books. And then also there are tons of magazines that are written for kids that would also be a great way to get them hooked on reading. So when we think about what we should read to kids, it's a little bit different than what we read with them and what they read independently. We really want to have kids have a balanced reading diet. So what does that mean? I'm going to keep moving myself around here to stay out of the way. So when we think about books that we're reading to kids, the difficulty should be fairly challenging because you're the one as the parent or grandparent or older sibling, whatnot, that is doing most of the work, all of the decoding and saying all the words and explaining things that they don't understand. So when we choose books to read to our children or texts to read to our children, they should be pretty challenging. And this helps them build their vocabulary beyond what they're likely to read or hear within their own texts that are at their level. The purposes of the texts that we read to children are really to entertain them, to interest them, to build their enjoyment, to stretch their vocabulary, and to build their knowledge about all kinds of things that they might not be able to learn about on their own. In terms of the texts that we read with our kids, the difficulty should be what's called an instructional level. You might hear teachers talk about that. They should be slightly challenging for kids to read on their own. They kind of need us, or they need a teacher with them to help them through that text. And the purposes of texts at this kind of level is to practice and gain skills and strategies with some support, to stretch their vocabulary a bit and to build their knowledge. And then finally, when we think about choosing texts that kids should be reading independently, it really needs to be at what's called an independent level, where they have like 98% accuracy, which may seem really high, but if they are struggling with too many of the words, then the comprehension falls apart and reading becomes a chore, and we don't want that. So when we think about what books or texts that kids should be reading on their own, they should be pretty easy, because the purpose is for them to just practice the skills that they've already learned, not to learn necessarily new skills, but to practice ones that they've already learned, and strategies that they've already learned. These texts can also still stretch their vocabulary, but in different ways, in that they're not necessarily a lot of new words that they don't know the meaning of, but they can see how words that they already know are used in various ways. And of course, to build their knowledge, and especially to develop their interest in reading and develop a reading habit. So that's another reason why they have to be on the easier side. So in this video, I'm mostly talking about these books and how we choose these books that are slightly challenging, because we're the ones that are reading it to them. So here are some resources to find great texts for kids. First of all, librarians, they love when we ask them, hey, my kid really likes, I don't know, alligators. Do you have any books about alligators that my kid would like? So please tap your librarians. They would love to talk with you about books for your kiddo. Also, published book lists. There are thousands of published book lists out there. There are websites and apps. The Goodreads app is one I use myself as a reader, but we also can have kids have private accounts on Goodreads. The American Library Association publishes lists. And I'll be providing a lot of links to various sites and things that can guide you in finding great texts for your children. This quote I just love. There are many little ways to enlarge your child's world. Love of books, or texts, I would say, is the best of all. So I encourage you to check out some of my other videos in this series about reading to and with children, and connect with me on social media or visit me on my website, lastingliteracysolutions.com. Thanks for visiting.